Thank you for watching another episode of MiniGrinder Paints. In this episode, I'll be painting Kozak from Dreamscarred Press. I was asked to convert this miniature to a Scottish bard, and as you can see for yourself, it's pure Barry. For this conversion, I hand sculpted a sash. I also added a sword from Reaper's weapon pack and an instrument from their instrument pack. If you stay tuned, I'll even show you how I frothed the mug, which I can tell you is 100% bona fide, guaranteed, actual terminology. Feel free to use it in any high-level hobbyist conversation that you may have. Alright, let's stop fooling around now. Let's get into it. In this episode, we'll be using Reaper's Master Series paints: Pure Black, Pure White, Stone Gray, Aged Bone, Muddy Brown, Earth Brown, Tan Leather, Fair Shadow, Tan Skin, Golden Blonde, Blood Red, Leaf Green, and an MSP sample. It's kind of a dark green, as you can see here. You know me, I like to start with the eyes first. Go with an off-white. I'm using a mix between Aged Bone and Pure White. For the iris, we're going to use that MSP sample, which I will refer to now as dark green. Just a few dabs. Now I'm going to give it a top dab of leaf green, just to brighten it up a bit. I'm using the 5-0 Taklon Detailer from BigDwarfGames.com. Just a nip of Pure White for the eye shine. Now we're going to encase the eyes with the base color of the skin. For this, I'm using a 1:5 mix of Blood Red to Earth Brown. I've been playing around with adding a little bit more red into the base colors for Caucasian skin tones. It does help the skin look a little bit more fleshy when you add the top layers. For the hair, I'll be using a thinned down muddy brown. The combination of my frosted priming technique with this thinned down layer makes your first base layer a little shaded already. It's nice to put down a base layer and then already have some tonal definition. I'm base layering the tartan with a mix of muddy brown and blood red. Kind of 1:4 ratio. The shirt is getting base layered in unadulterated aged bone. For the top layer of the flesh tone, I'm using some undiluted tan skin. I'm painting all the highlighted spots first, and then what I'll do is I'll come back in with some diluted tan skin and fill in that space. You could also do it the other way. You could start with the diluted layer and then top it with the straight layer after it's dried. Whatever it takes to get the desired effect. Here I am starting with the washed layer first. There is a perfect amount of water loaded in with the paint. When you get it just right, you can see how easy it is to blend. Now I'm adding the straight tan skin to define the muscles. And there you go. AC/DC rules. I'm going to blend in the top layer with some pure blood red, slightly thinned. For the top layer of the hair, I'm starting with a very light dry brushing of golden blonde. The more subtle the nooks and crannies, the drier the brush you'll want. As always, the downside to dry brushing is going to be the grainy texture when finished. So I'll go back in with a wash of muddy brown. This will help smooth out the graininess of the dry brushing. After it's dried, highlight with some more golden blonde. I'm using the paint straight up and it is moderately loaded. If you happen to paint in any of the grooves, just come back with a liner brush and redefine them. The top layer of the shirt will be some pure white. I want it nice and bright, nice and formal. I'll blend the edges of that white layer with some thinned down pure white. All the leather bits are going to get some targeted dry brushing of tanned leather. Cannot stress enough how light of a dry brush I use. Now I want to highlight those leathers, and I'm just going to use some pure, moderately loaded tanned leather. Using thinned down muddy brown, I'm just going to create a little bit more definition with the shirt tie. You could call it kind of a strategic wash. Using my detailer as kind of a liner here, I'm just going to underline those ties. Try and think about how the light hits these objects. To tie it all together, I'll top layer the ties with the tan leather. Oh yeah, all tied up. Do not forget about the buckle. Yeah, I'm going to top layer it with some tan leather, and then I'm going to highlight it with some golden blonde. Every now and then take a step back. Take a look. It's looking pretty good. Patronage. I'm going to base layer this little guy with some thinned down earth brown. And after it's dry, I'm going to come back with a dark wash and tone it down. Speaking of dark wash, I'm going to tone down the sword. Remember, with non-metal metal, contrast is key. If you load your brush properly with an appropriately thinned paint, it is possible to make your first layer your last layer. Here, all I've done is dried the brush to wipe away some of the paint. Glazed hop is quite nice with a touch of washed tanned leather. Now line with an undiluted dribble, and you are done. So my wash is dried a little bit, and it's really good for lining right now, and some subtle shading. My typical algorithm for thinning a paint to use as a liner is to take a dry brush and then rinse it. I then wipe the excess water off on a damp sponge, because I don't want to get rid of too much of the water before I mix it in with the paint. With all the washes finished and the miniature dry, I'm going to go back and work on the sword. For this layer of the non-metal metal, I'm using stone gray that's been slightly diluted so it blends nicely. When you're doing this, you have to consider where the shine is coming from. From what direction is the light pointing? Now I'm going to work on the hilt and handles base layer of the non-metallic gold. I'm using a very slightly diluted dark mix of dark skin and pure black. For the mid-range, I'm using tanned leather. The paint is lightly loaded on a damp brush. As I build up the layer, the brush dries, which is precisely what I needed to do to top off the layer. At the moment, it looks like a dulled blade, but we're going to enhance it a little bit more. And this layer is using golden blonde to highlight the non-metallic gold. The paint is lightly loaded on a damp brush. I often find myself using a 5-0 detailer. It's usually my go-to, since I do so much freehand stuff. Take a look at the difference. You have the gently used gold and the antique gold. However, we want a well-maintained sword because that is most aesthetically pleasing. I'm just using a thin blend of pure white, and I'll proceed to build up the shine. By using an angular brushing motion like this, you can build up kind of a sheen, which is not to be confused with a shine, or Charlie Sheen, or Charlie Shine, I don't know. I'm just cleaning up the other side. Again, with some pure white, lightly loaded on a damp brush, we're just going to make some shine. The more you watch my videos, you'll see that that's just how I top off my non-metallic metals. It's the end of the road. As long as you're not painting something rusty or whatever, you're going to want this last layer, regardless of the type of metal that you're emulating. Okay, so for the handle, we're going to start off with a base of muddy brown, and then follow it up with a freehand striping of blood red. To give the red layer some more oomph, I've decided to repeat that layer. To highlight the handle, I'm going to use a minutely diluted nibble of aged bone and blood red. And now the tartan. I'm going to start with a liner of dark green. The paint is loaded on a damp brush, and we're just going to build up stripe after stripe at equal intervals. When you've made it all the way around, go ahead and hit the horizontal lines. You want these horizontal lines to have a similar spacing as the vertical lines. Don't worry about making these stripes too thin, as we're going to have some super thin stripes later. I'm highlighting the dark green stripes with some leaf green that has been loaded onto a damp brush. For the super thin lines, I'm using the 5-0 liner brush from bigdwarfgames.com. And I gotta say, I sure am getting a lot of miles out of this golden blonde. I like to limit my palette in this way, so that each portion of the miniature is guaranteed to match every other portion. Also because I'm poor and can't afford paint. Anyways, it's good practice to see what you can do with color mixing. It's just a wonderful way to paint. And now for the frothing. For this you'll need a little guy of clump foliage, and I'm just rolling it around in a mix between aged bone and golden blonde. After it's saturated, make it a menagerie with some pure white. Oh yeah, beep baby. Using a paper clip, I'm going to apply some super glue to this dimple in the pewter mug. And then take your dried frothy bit with some tweezers, stick it in there. Now just pluck the excess froth. I mean, it looks like it's getting a little crazy, so just trim it back a nip. I want some froth rolling down the side. I'm just going to use some more super glue applied via paper clip. Now take your plucked froth and stick it there. There we go. Just a little bit more of a nudge. Perfect. This piece was commissioned with basic basing, which means I get to flock this guy. Using my paper clip with a targeted dribbled technique, I am applying some super glue to the base. Now I'll just nestle it in the flock. I'm just using some static grass. Now I take it out and tap it off a bit and reapply anywhere where there's still some super glue showing. Haha! You thought I was done painting. Actually, I thought I was too, and then I was like, oh no, I forgot to highlight the skin. But that's okay. Some damp fair shadow will save the day. And Kozak can now toast to victory. And I think I will too. I want to thank you for joining me for another episode of MiniGrinder Paints. If you too thought it was pure beauty, then give it a like, maybe even a subscribe. He's looking good on top of Rain Studios Terra tiles, fighting off some Stonehaven Tengus. I gotta tell ya, I had a blast painting Dreamscarred Press Ultimate Psionics Kickstarter campaign miniatures. When it's finished, make sure you check out the next episode of MG Showcase. But if you'd like to see the images now, just hop over to my Facebook page or Google Plus page, MiniGrinder Studio. I post all my pictures there. And if you're looking for paints or brushes or anything of that nature, stop by bigdwarfgames.com and use the promo code MG10 for 10% off everything in the store. Using that promo code will give you almost 15% off paint because their everyday price is already marked down 5%. I want to thank you one last time for joining me. Have a wonderful day.